Most people walk through life on solid ground, trusting the visible world. They build their houses, their careers, their families on foundations they believe are firm. This was my belief before Marcus Thorne ever entered my life, long before his indifference shattered my world and transformed my perfect peaceful world into a singular burning purpose to dismantle the man who built his empire on sand and buried my family in the collapse. My life, before the fracture, was built on simple, sturdy things: a small house on a quiet street, the scent of my wife Eleanor's baking on a Sunday morning, the sound of my son Leo's laughter echoing from the backyard swing set. I was a structural engineer, a man who understood foundations, load-bearing walls, the physics of stability. I built things that stood firm against the wind and the rain. I thought my own life was just as solid. Marcus Thorne, the man who brought it all down, wasn't a monster in the conventional sense, not a snarling villain. He was worse. He was indifference personified, cloaked in wealth and influence. His construction firm, Thorne Enterprises, was a titan in the city, known for cutting corners, greasing palms, and leaving a trail of shoddy work and exploited labor in its wake. I'd seen their blueprints, the compromised supports, the cheap materials disguised as quality. I'd even filed a formal complaint once, citing egregious safety violations on a major downtown project. It went nowhere, buried under layers of bureaucracy and Thorne's considerable legal team. Then came the day the new wing of the city library collapsed. It was a Tuesday. Eleanor had taken Leo to story time. They loved the library, the smell of old paper, the hushed reverence of the reading rooms. The new wing, built by Thorne Enterprises, had been open less than a year. The news reports were chaotic at first, fragmented screams and sirens on the radio. Then I got the phone call. Eleanor, Leo, caught in the dust and rubble, victims of a structure designed to fail, a foundation built on greed. The world didn't just stop, it imploded. The sturdy walls of my life crumbled, leaving me standing in the ruins, breathing the dust of everything I loved. Grief was a physical thing, a constant, suffocating weight. Justice, I quickly learned, was just another structure that Thorne's money could easily dismantle. The investigation was a farce. Blame was deflected onto subcontractors, regulatory bodies, even the weather. Thorne himself issued a carefully worded statement, expressing deepest sympathies, while his lawyers ensured no liability stuck to his name or company. There were settlements, paltry sums offered to grieving families in exchange for silence, and signed waivers. They offered me $100,000 for my wife and son. As if money could restore what Marcus Thorne had taken from me, I refused. Their money felt like blood money. The system had failed. Utterly. The inquest was a performance, the lawyers were actors, and Thorne was the untouchable director, pulling the strings from his gilded cage. Every deflection, every carefully crafted lie, every smirking dismissal of responsibility felt like another ton of rubble dropped onto my chest. Despair was a huge, empty room I was trapped in. The silence broken only by the echoes of laughter that would never sound again. I sat in that room, numb, broken, watching the man responsible walk free, his empire untouched, his life continuing while mine was a pile of dust. It was in that profound, suffocating darkness, in the absolute zero of my despair, that the idea took root. It wasn't a flicker of hope. It was a dark, fertile seed in the scorched earth of my soul, watered by bitterness and the chilling realization that the structures of justice I had believed in were as compromised as Thorne's buildings. If justice wouldn't be served in a courtroom, if the system designed to protect us was just another facade for men like Thorne, then I would have to build my own. I would become the architect of Marcus Thorne's ruin. It wasn't enough for him to suffer. He had to lose everything, just as I had. His reputation, his fortune, his freedom, his carefully constructed life. I would dismantle his life, piece by piece, reveal the rot beneath his polished facade, until he was left with nothing but the wreckage of his own making. The first few years were spent in the shadows, mourning publicly while privately studying my enemy. I learned everything about Marcus Thorne, his daily routine, his habits, his vices, his family, a wife who him oblivious, 2 adult children more interested in spending his money than earning it. I studied his company's structure, its vulnerabilities, the network of corruption that propped it up. I, a structural engineer, was now analyzing the stress points in a human life and a corporate empire. I changed my name, grew a beard, adopted a new, unremarkable identity. I took a series of menial jobs that allowed me access to different layers of the city. A delivery driver, a security guard, even briefly, a cleaner in one of Thorne's less prestigious buildings. I was a ghost, watching, listening, collecting scraps of information that the city's elite carelessly discarded. My revenge was a blueprint, drawn in meticulous detail. Phase 1, undermine his financial stability. Phase 2, destroy his public image. Phase 3, isolate him. Phase 4, the final collapse. Phase 1 began slowly, using anonymous offshore accounts and encrypted communications. I started shorting Thorne Enterprises stock based on my insider knowledge of their precarious financial state and upcoming failed projects, information I gleaned from disgruntled former employees and leaked internal memos. It was risky, requiring precise timing and a deep understanding of market manipulation. It wasn't a quick kill but a slow bleed, chipping away at his vast fortune. I also anonymously leaked incriminating documents about his tax evasion schemes to investigative journalists known for their tenacity. The resulting audits and fines were a significant blow, forcing Thorne to divert resources and attention. Phase 2 required a different approach: character assassination. Thorne had carefully cultivated an image of a philanthropic, upstanding businessman. I targeted his weaknesses: a penchant for illicit affairs, a history of mistreating employees, his blatant disregard for safety that had killed my family. I didn't fabricate lies. I unearthed truths he had buried. Anonymous tips sent to gossip blogs, carefully timed photos delivered to tabloids, disgruntled former associates encouraged to speak out with a little financial incentive from my anonymous accounts. The whispers started, then grew into a roar. His name, once synonymous with success, began to carry a stench of scandal. Phase 3 was isolation. His wife, tired of the scandals and the constant stress, filed for divorce, taking a significant portion of his remaining legitimate wealth. His children, embarrassed and cut off from his funds during the financial squeeze, abandoned him. Business partners, wary of the damage to their own reputations, distanced themselves. The network of corruption, built on loyalty bought with money, began to fray as the money dried up, and the risk increased. The man who had been surrounded by sycophants and associates found himself increasingly alone in his sprawling, empty mansion. Years passed. My face in the mirror was a stranger's. The grief for Eleanor and Leo was a dull ache now. Overshadowed by the cold fire of my purpose, I was no longer the man who built houses. I was the man who specialized in demolition. My hands, once skilled with blueprints and calculations, were now adept at navigating the dark web, crafting untraceable messages, and exploiting human weakness. I had become as calculating and ruthless as the man I sought to destroy. In Marcus Thorne, I watched his public appearances dwindle, his confident stride replaced by a nervous shuffle. The lines on his face weren't from age, they were etched by stress and fear. He was losing control, his empire crumbling around him, exactly as I had planned. The time came for Phase 4, the final collapse. I had saved the most damning evidence for last, undeniable proof, cross-referenced and verified, linking Thorne directly to the cost-cutting measures that led to the library collapse, along with evidence of witness tampering and obstruction of justice during the initial investigation. This wasn't just financial or reputational damage. This was prison time. I delivered this package of destruction to the one journalist I trusted to see it through. A woman who had lost a relative in the same collapse and had a reputation for fearless reporting. I chose a night I knew Thorne would be home alone, drowning his sorrows in his study. I wanted to be close, to feel the culmination of my years of work, to know that the architect of my ruin was finally facing his own. I didn't plan to confront him, just to be near, to watch as his world imploded. I slipped onto his vast estate under the cover of darkness, a ghost in the manicured gardens I had once cleaned. The mansion was silent, save for the distant murmur of the city. I found my way to the study window, peering inside. The air felt charged, heavy with the weight of years of anticipation. Every fiber of my being was focused on the man within, the culmination of my purpose finally within reach. There he was, Marcus Thorne, slumped in his leather chair, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, staring blankly at the flickering fire. He looked broken, defeated. My heart, a cold stone for so long, didn't just feel triumph. It surged with a fierce, almost terrifying elation. Every sleepless night, every calculated risk, every piece of my old life I'd sacrificed, it had all led to this singular, exquisite moment. The years of planning, of living only for this purpose, culminated in the sight of his defeat. He was ruined. He was alone. Justice, or my twisted version of it, was finally being served. As I watched, a subtle change came over the room. The shadows deepened, not naturally, but as if they were being thickened, given substance. The air grew cold, colder than the night outside. A hum started, building slowly until it was deafening, vibrating not just in my bones, but in the very glass of the window pane. Thorne stirred, his eyes widening, not with the recognition of my presence, but with a different kind of fear. He wasn't looking at the window. He was looking at the space above his desk. Then it descended. It wasn't a physical being, not in the way we understand bodies. It was a distortion, a tear in reality that unfolded into a shape that defied geometry. A shifting, iridescent void that pulsed with malevolent light. It was the source of the hum. And it spoke. Not with a voice, but directly into my mind. A chorus of alien thoughts that ripped through my consciousness, cold and sharp as shards of ice. The construct is complete. The resonance is sufficient. My blood ran cold. What construct? What resonance? Thorne, trembling, looked up at the distortion. His fear was palpable. A raw animal terror. But beneath it, a flicker of something else. Recognition. Yes. But also a terrible, weary resignation. He knew this was coming. The entity's presence focused on Thorne, and another wave of alien thought washed over me, clearer this time. A horrifying explanation unfolding directly in my mind, not in words, but in pure, dreadful understanding. He served his purpose. The catalyst was effective. Catalyst? What catalyst? My mind screamed the question into the psychic void. My carefully constructed world beginning to fracture around me. The disruption, the energy released by the sudden violent cessation of multiple resonant frequencies, the grief, the rage, the singular, sustained focus of a shattered consciousness. It creates a unique harmonic, a key. Resonant frequencies, grief, rage, my family, the pieces slammed together with sickening force. Eleanor, Leo, their vibrant lives, their unique frequencies, abruptly silenced. Thorne's frequency, strong and tied to the material world, disrupted by the dismantling of his life. And mine. And yours. The architect, your frequency, once stable, was shattered. Rebuilt around a single, powerful vibration. Vengeance. The years of focus, the meticulous dismantling, the sustained hatred. This was the perfect resonator. You amplified the harmonic. You honed the key. The truth crashed down. A cosmic weight that flattened my soul. My revenge, my pain, my life since the collapse. It wasn't my struggle for justice. It wasn't about punishing Thorne. It was a process, a calculation. I hadn't been seeking vengeance. I had been farming a specific kind of energy, a specific frequency of suffering and focused intent required by this thing. Thorn wasn't the architect of my ruin. He was just the initial demolition charge, the trigger. I was the sustained, directed force that cleared the ground, honed the energy, built the mechanism for this. I was the architect, not of his ruin, but of the very key this entity needed. The horror of it was absolute, a despair so profound, it made my previous grief feel like a child scraped knee. The gate is prepared, the path is open. The distortion above Thorn intensified, swirling faster, deeper, no longer just a tear, but a yawning maw, a doorway into realms that burned the mind with their impossible colors and shapes. Thorn looked at the entity, then back towards the window where he seemed to sense my presence. Even though he couldn't see me, there was no smugness now, only a profound, weary despair, and a chilling finality. It is time. His voice was a dry whisper that somehow cut through the hum, a confession in the face of the infinite, devoid of the arrogance I'd always associated with him. The terms are met, the debt is paid. He looked back at the entity, his eyes wide with a terror that transcended human fear, but also a strange, terrible peace. My ancestors' bargain, finally concluded? The entity didn't respond in words, but the thought chorus confirmed it, filling my mind with the cold, ancient history of it all. This was a debt, inherited, a price agreed upon by a distant ancestor. Marcus Thorn's life, his actions, his carefully cultivated indifference. This was his lifelong penance, a necessary coping mechanism to perform the terrible, calculated acts required to fulfill the terms, and finally break the chain for his own children. The Thorn line had been marked, their lives subtly guided, their deaths calculated for generations, all for the pleasure of this entity. The library collapse, the deaths of my family, his escape from justice. It isn't just part of his price, it was part of the inherited price. A specific set of circumstances required to create the perfect harmonic, the specific frequency of shattered grief, and focused vengeance needed to power the gate. My subsequent descent into revenge, my years of pain and focus, were the final necessary payment, the honing of the key that he was obligated to facilitate. He hadn't escaped justice because he was rich. He had escaped because his continued existence, and my reaction to it, was necessary for this entity's plan. A plan set in motion generations ago. My grief, my rage, my life's singular purpose, it was all just fuel for its gate, a debt I was forced to help pay, unknowingly, with the ashes of my family. The distortion pulsed, and Thorn's form began to shimmer, to distort, not destroyed, but integrated. His physical structure, his consciousness, his very being, was being pulled into the impossible geometry of the gate. He didn't scream. He simply dissolved into the light, another frequency absorbed into the cosmic mechanism. The entity turned its full, incomprehensible attention towards me. Standing outside in the cold garden, the hum was unbearable, threatening to tear my own mind apart, a psychic shriek of alien triumph. The resonator is no longer required. The frequency is stored. I felt a pull, not physical, but existential. A sense of being unraveled, of the threads of my being, plucked and stored like data. I wasn't being killed. I was being archived, like I no longer had any purpose. The gate above Thorn's desk flared one last time, then snapped shut, leaving behind only the lingering scent of ozone, and something else, something ancient and cold. The hum receded, not disappearing entirely, but settling back into that maddening, subtle vibration beneath reality. I was left standing in the garden, the cold seeping into my bones. Thorn was gone, absorbed into some cosmic mechanism. My revenge was a cruel joke, a meticulously crafted engine of suffering that served an alien purpose I couldn't even grasp. I hadn't destroyed my enemy. I had been his unwitting accomplice in opening a door to something terrible, fulfilling a debt I didn't even know existed, with the lives of those I loved most. The man who built solid structures, the grieving husband and father, the cold, calculating avenger. Who was I now? My purpose was gone, revealed as a lie. My identity, so long defined by my hatred and my quest, was hollowed out. I was just the leftover shell of a tool, used and discarded. The crushing weight of this realization, the understanding that my most profound pain had been used, orchestrated, and made a part of an ancient, alien transaction, was a new, bottomless abyss of despair. There were no answers left, only the horrifying truth that I was a puppet who had orchestrated his own strings being pulled, a necessary component in a cosmic debt payment. The city lights twinkled in the distance, oblivious. People slept in their sturdy houses, living their solid lives, unaware of the hum, unaware of the architect, of their reality, and the price paid in human suffering to maintain the facade. I walked away from the mansion, not towards anywhere, just away. The weight of grief was back, but heavier now, mixed with existential horror, and the profound, crushing understanding that my deepest pain, my most consuming purpose, had been nothing more than a frequency, tuned and exploited by something vast and utterly indifferent. The cost of my vengeance wasn't just my soul, it was revealing the terrifying truth that we are all just vibrations in a cosmic symphony, played for an audience we can't comprehend, and sometimes our most profound suffering is the note they need to hear. The waves crashed against the research platform in rhythmic succession, rocking it gently like a cradle. I removed my headphones and rubbed my tired eyes. 3 hours of listening to underwater recordings had yielded nothing unusual, until now. I played the segment again, leaning closer to my monitor, as if proximity might reveal something the audio analysis software had missed. There. A pattern unlike anything in my extensive database of marine sounds. Not a whale, not a dolphin, not the creaking of ice or the grinding of tectonic plates. Something else. They're still at it. Dr. Harris appeared in the doorway of the lab, coffee mug in hand. His face showed the concern of a colleague who had watched me grow increasingly obsessive over the past week. "Listen to this," I said, not looking up. I played the sequence again and watched Harris's expression. Nothing. No recognition, no intrigue. "I don't hear anything unusual," he admitted after a moment. "It's there, between the 47 and 49-second mark." Harris sighed. "Eliza, you've been working 16-hour days. The equipment on the Northwest Array has been glitchy since that storm last month." "This isn't a glitch." My voice was firm. "I've isolated it from 3 different hydrophones." Harris set his mug down and leaned against my desk. "Look, we're all concerned. You haven't been the same since the divorce. Taking this position at the edge of nowhere was supposed to give you space to heal, not this." I stiffened. "This has nothing to do with Michael." "Then get some sleep. That's an order from your station chief." His tone softened. "Whatever you're hearing will still be there tomorrow." After he left, I added the new recording to my growing collection, and reluctantly headed to my quarters. But sleep, when it finally came, brought no rest. I was underwater, drifting downward. No scuba gear, no pressure, no fear. Just the embrace of cold darkness as I descended. And then the sounds, the same patterns I'd been tracking for days, surrounded me, vibrating through my body rather than my ears. "We remember you." I jolted awake, gasping. My sheets were soaked with sweat, and the taste of salt filled my mouth. The dream had been so vivid I could still feel the pressure of deep water against my skin. I reached for my phone and checked the time. 3:17 a.m. Sleep was impossible now. Instead, I activated my room's audio recorder. Originally intended for dictating research notes, and played back the night's recording. My blood turned cold as I heard my own voice speaking during my sleep, but the words weren't English, nor any language I recognized. The cadence, however, matched perfectly with the underwater sounds I'd been studying. 2 weeks later, My quarters had transformed into a chaotic nest of data printouts, spectrograms, and linguistic reference materials. My station colleagues now actively avoided me, whispering about stress-induced breakdowns and the harsh realities of isolation research. Only Dr. Chen, the station's medical officer, still made daily visits. Today, her concern was palpable. "Your blood work shows significant abnormalities," Chen said, tablet in hand. "Elevated sodium levels, unusual protein markers, and the lesions on your neck." "They're not lesions," I interrupted, my hand instinctively covering the tender spots along my neck just below my ears. "They're sensitive areas, like pressure points." Chen's expression remained professional, but troubled. "They weren't there during your intake examination 2 months ago. People develop skin conditions under stress. You just said I'm stressed." "I'm recommending medical evacuation. The next supply helicopter can..." "No." My vehemence surprised even myself. "I mean, that's not necessary. I'm close to identifying the source. I just need more time." "More time for what, exactly?" Chen's gaze swept over the chaos of the room. "This doesn't look like marine biology research anymore, Eliza." That night, I added another lock to my door. I couldn't risk being forcibly evacuated, not when I was so close, not when the dreams had become so clear. The night dive wasn't sanctioned. After the station went quiet, and the night shift skeleton crew was occupied with routine monitoring, I slipped out to the platform's dive deck. The moon hung full and bright, casting silver ripples across the black water. Standard protocol required a dive partner, proper logging, and communication equipment. I took only my wetsuit, a small underwater light, and an experimental hydrophone I'd modified to emit the sounds from my recordings. The water embraced me like an old friend. 50 feet down, I activated the hydrophone and waited. The sound patterns pulsed into the darkness, and I felt a strange comfort in being surrounded by them. I didn't have to wait long. A shimmering in the distance caught my eye. Movement where no reef existed, no known migration route for large marine life. As I swam closer, my light revealed nothing but open water. Yet the sensation of presence intensified. Something brushed against my leg. Not the solid form of a fish or mammal, but something with enough substance to leave the ghost of pressure against my skin. I turned, heart pounding, but saw only darkness. "We remember you, Eliza Marsh." The voice didn't come through my ears. It resonated inside my skull, as if my brain itself were vibrating with sound. I gasped involuntarily, sucking water into my mouth. But instead of choking, I felt the water pass over something in my throat that filtered it naturally. Panic seized me. I kicked toward the surface, toward air and light, and the solid reality of the research platform. As I broke through the waves, coughing and sputtering, my hands flew to my neck, where the sensitive areas now burned like acid against my skin. "What do you mean I was sleepwalking?" I demanded the next morning. Harris looked exhausted. "Security footage shows you walking onto the dive deck at 2:30 a.m. Chen had to physically restrain you from jumping into the ocean without any gear." "That's impossible. I did dive last night, but I was fully aware and equipped." Harris shook his head. "Your wetsuit was dry, Eliza, but your clothes and hair were soaked with salt water when Chen found you." My mind raced. I remembered the dive vividly. The modified hydrophone, the presence in the water, the voice. I remembered returning to my quarters afterward, reviewing my findings. There couldn't be gaps in my memory, could there? "I want to show you something," Harris said, pulling out a tablet. "This is from your sleep recordings 3 nights ago." On screen, I watched myself sit upright in bed, eyes open but vacant. My mouth moved, forming words in that same unknown language I'd heard on my recordings. But then the camera captured something else, my neck, where dark slits momentarily opened and closed with each breath. "This isn't possible," I whispered. "We've contacted your family," Harris continued gently. "Your mother is flying in with the medical evacuation team tomorrow." My mother. The mention sent an unexpected chill through me. Why her? We've barely spoken in years. She mentioned something about a family history of episodes. She said she should have warned you about taking a job near the ocean. That night, I locked myself in my bathroom and examined the tender areas on my neck in the mirror. They weren't lesions or irritation. The skin was different there, thinner and faintly iridescent in the bright light. When I pressed gently, I felt structures beneath that shouldn't exist in human anatomy. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Don't let them take you from the water. Grandmother made that mistake. So did I. Don't repeat our suffering. The area code was from my mother's coastal hometown, a place I had visited only once as a child. A place where my grandmother had lived in a house facing the sea. Windows always open to the sound of waves, despite the cold. A place where local legends spoke of people who sometimes returned to the ocean. I had always dismissed those stories as the folklore of an isolated fishing community. Now I wasn't so certain. I ran a bath and submerged myself, allowing the lukewarm water to cover my face. The burning sensation in my neck subsided immediately. Beneath the water, I exhaled experimentally and felt those structures open, extracting oxygen from the water with quiet efficiency. I wasn't discovering a new species. I was becoming one. The storm hit with unexpected ferocity just after midnight. Winds howled around the research platform, and waves crashed against its supports with thunderous force. The evacuation helicopter scheduled for morning arrival would never be able to land in such conditions. I stood on the observation deck, letting the rain soak me completely. Each drop felt like a blessing on my increasingly sensitive skin. Lightning forked across the sky, momentarily illuminating the churning sea below. And the shapes moving within it, they weren't human, not entirely. Humanoid forms undulated beneath the surface, their bodies reflecting the lightning in silver flashes. Dozens of them, circling the platform, waiting. Come home, daughter of daughters. Return to us. The voice, now recognizable as many voices speaking in unison, filled my mind with impossible clarity, despite the storm's rage. Something ancient stirred in my blood, memories that weren't mine yet somehow belonged to me. I remembered swimming through midnight depths, hunting in coordinated patterns with others of my kind. I remembered breathing water as easily as air, communicating through sound patterns that traveled miles through ocean currents. I remembered the joy of belonging to something vast and timeless. Eliza, get inside, Harris was shouting from the doorway, one arm raised against the driving rain. Behind him stood Chen and two security officers. I turned toward them, suddenly seeing them through alien eyes. Their fragility, their limitation to one element, their brief lifespans. They thought they were saving me, but they were really trapping me. I know what I am now, I called back, my voice carrying unnaturally over the storm. Harris took a cautious step forward. Whatever you're experiencing, we can help you. Your mother will be here as soon as the storm passes. My mother, I laughed, the sound oddly melodic. She tried to deny it too, cut herself off from the water, married a man from inland, pretended we were just like everyone else. Another step. Harris was only 15 feet away now. Eliza, you're having some kind of psychological episode. Please come inside where it's safe. I'm not Eliza anymore. Not entirely. I moved toward the railing. Below, the shapes grew more agitated, their circling tighter, and I've never been safer than I am right now. Lightning crashed nearby, momentarily blinding everyone on the deck. In that instant of confusion, I made my decision. Not to jump, that would appear too much like suicide, and they might search for my body. Instead, I allowed myself to be rescued, offering no resistance as Harris and the security officers led me inside. 3 weeks later, I sat in my mother's coastal home, watching the tide roll in through the large bay windows. I'd been diagnosed with a rare genetic condition, that caused hallucinations and physical symptoms under certain environmental stressors. The medical literature described it as a hereditary syndrome particularly triggered by prolonged exposure to deep-sea environments. My mother knew better, but said nothing. I had seen her watching anxiously whenever my gaze lingered too long on the ocean. Had seen her check the locks on the doors at night. Had noticed the prescription pills she crushed into my food when she thought I wasn't looking. The pills dulled the call, but couldn't silence it entirely. At night I would press my ear to the floor and hear the voices singing to me through the foundation of the house, through the earth, through the groundwater that connected to the sea. During my daily monitored walks along the beach, I collected small items. A piece of fishing line here, a sharp shell there. In my room, I'd fashioned them into a crude but effective tool that could pick the simple lock my mother had installed on the outside of my bedroom door. Tonight was the new moon, the darkest night of the month. The tide would reach its highest point at 2:17 a.m. They would be waiting for me just beyond the breakers. I smiled at my mother across the dinner table. Accepting the food I now knew contained sedatives, I pretended to grow drowsy at the appropriate time and didn't resist being led to my bedroom. "It's for your own good," my mother whispered, tears in her eyes as she locked the door. "You don't understand what happens to people like us if we go back. We don't get to return." But I understood perfectly. That was precisely the point. After my mother's footsteps faded, I retrieved my homemade lockpick from its hiding place beneath a loose floorboard. The lock yielded easily. The house remained silent as I crept through it, past my sleeping mother, out the back door that led directly to the beach path. The night air carried the scent of salt and possibility. I shed my clothes at the waterline, exposing skin that had grown increasingly iridescent despite the medications. The tender areas on my neck throbbed in anticipation. As I waded into the midnight water, I felt no fear, only homecoming. The structures on my neck opened fully for the first time, and the sensation of breathing water was like shedding a lifetime of suffocation. Silver forms rose to meet me, their almost human faces alight with welcome. Hands that were not quite hands reached for mine, skin touching skin in recognition. Somewhere on shore, a motion detector light flashed on. My mother would soon discover my absence, but it was already too late. I had found my true element, and while part of me would always remember being human, the ocean depths were calling me home. The noise of the world grated on me like sandpaper on raw skin. Not people, exactly, but everything they produced. The symphony of modern existence with its ringing phones, urgent emails, impromptu meetings, keyboard clatter, and mindless office chatter. All of it formed an impenetrable barrier between me and my true passion. The archive. More specifically, the forgotten sub-basements where true history resided. Not the sanitized public-facing museum of remembrance, but the underbelly, where cool, dry air carried the comforting scent of aged paper and settled dust. Under the harsh glare of a single caged bulb that never seemed to dim, I found my treasures. Not presidential proclamations or nation-altering treaties, but history's fragments. Grocery lists tucked into ledgers, hasty notes scrawled on tax forms. Awkward photographs of barely documented lives. These forgotten souls' footnotes to humanity's grand narrative inspired a fierce, almost paternal devotion in me. My life's work, my obsession, was the compendium of the unremembered. Not some soulless digital database, but a physical monument. Thousands of meticulously cross-referenced index cards in my precise handwriting, documenting these forgotten lives. The third baker on Elm Street who briefly owned a cat named Bartholomew. The woman who left a single poem pressed between pages of a discarded novel. The child who drew an unsettlingly detailed map on a utility bill. These were my people. I felt kinship in their erasure from history's pages. I longed to weave their thin threads into a tapestry of human experience. And I needed just one thing. Time. Uninterrupted, boundless time. If only, I'd whisper to the silent shelves, if only I had time enough. The day everything changed began ordinarily. The usual email deluge, forced breakroom pleasantries, the city's persistent hum above. After lunch I retreated to my sanctuary, the heavy steel door clanging shut behind me with comforting finality. I was examining records from a defunct orphanage, hunting for traces of the child who drew that mysterious map. The first warning was a low, resonant groan from the building's very foundations. Deeper than settling pipes or aging concrete, it vibrated through the floor, up my legs, into my teeth. I glanced up, watching dust motes dance in the light. Then came the apocalyptic sound. Metal tearing, concrete splintering, a deafening roar. Debris rained down as instinct sent me diving beneath my solid oak desk. I squeezed my eyes shut, covering my head as destruction thundered around me. Then abruptly silence fell. Not archive silence, which was merely the absence of loud noise. This was profound. Absolute silence, a silence that felt final. I waited, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I tasted dust, felt grit between my teeth. I waited for sirens, shouts, rescue workers. Nothing came. Carefully I crawled from beneath the desk. Dust hung suspended in light beams from the still functioning bulb. A massive section of ceiling had collapsed, blocking the main aisle with twisted rebar, concrete chunks, and mangled ventilation ducts. I scrambled over the debris, hands scraping against jagged edges, and reached the steel door. I pulled the handle. It didn't budge. I pulled harder, throwing my weight against it. The frame had warped, sealing the heavy door shut. I was trapped. Panic flared hot in my chest. I pounded the door, shouting until my voice cracked. Only silence answered. After what seemed like hours, I slid to the floor, back against cold steel, gasping for breath. Despair washed over me, cold and deep. I was alone, buried, forgotten, just like those I studied. As terror receded, another feeling surfaced, quiet, insidious, utterly intoxicating. And that feeling was exhilaration. I was completely, utterly alone. No meetings, no emails, no interruptions. The dusty, silent space stretched before me. Shelves stood intact, thousands of documents waiting. My desk remained miraculously unharmed. The single bulb cast its steady light. I had time. The thought settled in my mind, warm and comforting. Time, all the time in the world. What I discovered next seemed too perfect to be coincidence. A reinforced room containing years of preserved food, bottled water, a chemical toilet, sturdy cot, and functioning ventilation system, an old fallout shelter, forgotten but intact. I could do more than survive. I could work. My days merged with nights. I lost track of time almost immediately. My life became the archive's rhythm. Wake, eat meager rations. Work, drink, work. Sleep when exhaustion claimed me. Wake again, work more. The compendium grew with astonishing speed. I felt peace, a profound contentment I'd never imagined possible, surrounded by my silent companions, building my monument to their fleeting existence. The silence transformed from an absence into a presence, a vast ocean in which I floated, anchored only by rustling paper and my scratching pen. Initially comforting. After weeks, or was it months, it began pressing inward, growing heavy, expectant. I started talking aloud to myself, narrating discoveries. Thomas Abernathy, haberdasher, 1892, died of consumption, leaving behind a collection of porcelain dolls. Fascinating. I'd read passages from letters and diaries, giving voice to the long dead. Then I began addressing the documents directly. So, Eleanor, your husband was lost at sea in 21. But this manifest lists him arriving in New York in 23. What happened to him in between? I'd pause, listening to profound silence, imagining responses, creating narratives around sparse facts. It felt less lonely. The first hint something was wrong came unexpectedly. I was examining a traveling salesman's file from the 1930s. I distinctly remembered reading about his wife and 2 daughters the previous day, a deal humanizing the dry sales reports. I reached for the document again, a faded letter to a supplier. I scanned the final paragraph where the personal note had been. It wasn't there. The letter ended abruptly after business details. Confused, I pulled my index card. Wife and 2 daughters mentioned in letter to Miller and Sons. October 14th, 1937. I checked the letter again. October 14th, 1937, Miller and Sons. The letter was correct, but the family mention had vanished. Unease jolted through me. Had I dreamt it? Hallucinated? No. I was certain. I remembered the brief glimpse into family life amid mundane records. I checked cross-references on the index card. They pointed only to sales reports. No family mentioned anywhere. Fatigue, I told myself. Isolation affecting me. I must have mixed up files. I annotated the index card, questioning the family detail, but unease lingered. And the next day, it happened again. I was verifying a birth date in a 1901 census. I'd recorded April 12, 1875. Looking at the census page again, the date clearly read, April 12, 1878. I stared at it, then at my index card. I distinctly remembered seeing 1875. I never made such mistakes. Precision defined my work. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I pulled related documents, a marriage certificate, death record. Both aligned with 1878. Where had I gotten 1875? I could almost visualize the number on the census page. I began checking previously processed documents. The baker's cat Bartholomew. Now the document mentioned a small, yapping dog. The woman's unpublished poem. Now a child's drawing of a lopsided house. The child's strange map. Still there, but the lines had shifted. Landmarks changed, depicting somewhere subtly, terrifyingly different. It wasn't fatigue or mixed files. The documents weren't physically changing. Same ink, same paper. The information itself was mutable. Facts dissolving and reforming like mist under a capricious sun. My entire system, my life's purpose, depended on history's permanence. But the foundation beneath me was crumbling. My sanity, built on verifiable data's solid rock, was fracturing. I tried fighting back. I'd read a passage, memorize it instantly, then look away, repeating information fiercely in my mind. Then I'd look back, heart pounding, praying for consistency. Sometimes, blessedly, it matched. A brief reprieve, a fragile anchor in the swirling chaos. More often it didn't. Words different, dates altered, names changed, details added or removed. I kept active documents in a pile, refusing to file them, staring for hours as if willpower alone could force consistency. I'd compare them to notes, to index cards that now recorded not just history, but its terrifying instability. My notes filled with question marks, cross-outs, frantic annotations. Was cat, now dog. Birth date 1875, now 1878. The inconsistencies multiplied like malignant cells in the dusty air. The archive wasn't just forgotten lives, it was a living entity whispering lies and reveling in contradiction. The silence, once my sanctuary, became terror. No longer empty, but full of shifting truths and altered histories. I started seeing things peripherally, fleeting shapes between aisles, shadows too deep, too solid. Were they the unremembered, angered by my failure to fix their stories? Or manifestations of the archive itself, physical embodiments of its contained chaos? I abandoned the compendium. What was the point? How build a compendium of truth when truth itself was fluid mockery? Index cards, once symbols of purpose, became accusations, testaments to failure. I began wandering aisles, pulling random documents, heart pounding with dread and perverse curiosity. What new horror would each page reveal? What impossible reality would scream from the ink? A soldier's letter describing a battle won, placed beside another document stating he died in that battle, which according to a third document never happened at all. A woman's diary mourning her husband's death in a fire, next to a newspaper announcing his triumphant return from voyage. The archive became a kaleidoscope of conflicting pasts, each asserting momentary reality before dissolving into another. I started destroying pages, screaming at shelves. "Stop it! Tell me the truth! What is the truth?" I'd tear pages, throw them down, watch dust settle on ink, stubbornly holding its latest lie. Time lost all meaning in this unchanging tomb of shifting realities. My clothes became rags, body gaunt, hair and beard matted. I stopped eating, forgot to drink water. Existence reduced to base survival and the soul-destroying terror of the archive's mutability. I huddled in corners, rocking back and forth, eyes unseeing, or crawled through aisles, fingers trailing over book spines and box edges, searching for solid ground in liquid history. One day or night, it no longer mattered. I found myself before a shelf I'd avoided for weeks. A small wooden box I remembered containing photographs from an asylum. With trembling hands, I opened it, knowing I shouldn't, but unable to resist. Inside was a single photograph, face down. I turned it over. It was me, not as I was now, but as I had been when I first entered the archive. Neat appearance, clear eyes, precise handwriting on the notation. According to the date on the back, the photo was taken in 1937. Impossible. I dropped it, backing away. When I gathered courage to look again, it showed a different man entirely. Someone I'd never seen before. The date now read 1964. I screamed until my voice gave out. Years later, a structural assessment team finally reached the collapsed sub-basement. They dug through debris, expecting a skeleton. They found me instead, barely alive, a living ghost, amidst my obsession's ruin. Curled fetally, surrounded by shredded paper and thousands of index cards. Many torn, others covered in frantic, illegible scrawl bearing no resemblance to my formerly neat hand. I didn't acknowledge the rescuers. I didn't even see them. My sunken eyes stared past them into unseen distance. I muttered continuously, voice a dry rasp, not about the people I'd tried to remember, not about lost time, but about the archive itself. It breathes, I whispered, barely audible. It shifts. It remembers everything, but everything it remembers is wrong. And I have all the time in the world to watch it forget, again, and again, and again. I had found my time enough at last, but in that time, surrounded by my singular desire's object, I discovered horror greater than any interruption or loneliness. The horror of reality refusing to hold still, a past that was a perpetual malicious lie, and a mind shattered, trying to grasp it. The doctors say I'm improving. They've moved me to a private room with large windows. Sunlight streams in, warm and reassuring. My therapist says confronting trauma is essential to recovery, so I've started keeping a journal, detailed precise notes on my daily experiences. Yesterday I reviewed my first entry. The date was wrong. The doctor's name had changed. The window I described faced east, not west. And no one believes me. Sweet dreams.